The president said back in February that the U.S. would respond forcefully if Americans were targeted in Ukraine. Brent Renaud was killed over the weekend. One of my colleagues was injured today. We're still waiting to hear if he's okay. So what is that response going to look like?
Well, let me first say, your colleague Benjamin Hall, I know there's not final reports yet, or we would wait for your news organization to confirm those, but our thoughts, the president's thoughts, our administration's thoughts are with him, his family, and all of you at Fox News as well. In terms of specific actions, I think you have seen the president lead the world in putting in place consequences, putting in place repercussions and steps in response to the actions of Russia, the brutal actions that have certainly impacted Ukrainian people and now have certainly impacted some Americans. But in terms of next steps or what the next consequence would be, I don't have anything to preview for you at this point in time.
But we've seen the president been so far unwilling to draw a red line on the kinds of atrocities that we're going to watch from the sidelines. But we've seen maternity wards being bombed, illegal weapons being used, pediatric hospitals being targeted. President Obama drew the red line for Syria at chemical weapons. So is there any thought process about what we're willing to watch happen before
Well, Jackie, I think it's important to reiterate as often as we can that what we're seeing is horrific, what we're seeing is barbaric, and the steps that the president has taken and led the world in taking have essentially led the Russian financial system to be on the brink of collapse. We have provided more military assistance to the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian government than any other country in the world, and more historic assistance than any other year to Ukraine in history. And we're doing that so that we can support them in this difficult moment. So I would say that at this moment in time, we have been hardly on the sidelines. We have been leading this effort around the world to respond to every step and every escalatory step that President Putin and the Russians are taking.
Isn't there a concern that if we don't draw the line at something like chemical weapons, that it'll make it easier for malign actors to use them in the future because they'll just go unpunished?
Well, Jackie, I think that you heard the president say on Friday that there would be severe consequences and the world would respond if they were to use chemical weapons. And what we have been doing over the course of the last several weeks, if not months, is providing as much information to the global community, to the media, and to others about what to expect. And when you have President Putin suggesting and Russian officials suggesting that the United States and Ukrainians are the ones who are working on a chemical weapons program, it's clear that this is a pattern that we have seen in the past of them trying to set up a predicate for their own actions.
But what does that end up looking like if the world responds? Because so far we've heard the president talk a lot about what the U.S. is not going to do in terms of, not wanting to trigger war with a nuclear power. But do we believe that Putin is, a rational kind of person who, would pay attention to something like that? I mean, he didn't need provocation to, invade Ukraine. Why wouldn't we think that he would just create a pretext that is fabricated for something like that?
We do. That's why we've talked about it. And I think, Jackie, what's important here is and then I'm just going to move on to get to more people, is that for any president, you have to weigh how you can lead the world, how you can make very clear that actions are horrific, that they are not acceptable, they're not aligned with global norms, while also thinking about our own national security interests. And starting World War III is certainly not in our national security interests. Putting U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine to fight a war with Russia is not in our national security interests. Go ahead. I just have to move on because otherwise I'm not going to get to enough people. Go ahead.
To what you said, though, about misinformation in Twitter.
Yeah.
Because last year the president worked with Twitter specifically to address misinformation on vaccines, called it a wartime effort. Has there been any conversations with Twitter to address misinformation as it pertains to chemical attacks and that kind of thing, given that Russia has banned this platform within the country and they're using it to obviously target eyes outside of the country, including within the U.S., to spread propaganda and
We are the ones
misinformation?
who told you all about that. I agree. I don't have anything to read out for you in terms of private conversations with Twitter or any other social platform, but I'm happy to check and see if there's more. Go ahead.